The stagecoach left her at dusk, wheels groaning as if relieved to be rid of her weight. Dust rose in a copper haze around the single trunk she carried, its leather corners cracked from miles of rail and road. Clara Mayfield stood alone on the edge of Dry Creek, the kind of town that liked to remember every sin longer than it remembered its own kindness. She had once been a traveling nurse, stitching wounds from Kansas to Missouri, holding fevered hands through long prairie nights. But after the war ended, rumors found her quicker than patients did. They said she'd lost a man on her table on purpose. They said she'd taken pay to look the other way. They said a woman who knew so much about blood and men's bodies had no right to call herself decent. None of it true. But truth didn't matter much where tongues worked faster than wagons. Now she was here, a widow in black boots, dress hem torn from travel, her face shadowed by the wide brim of a nurse's hat she couldn't quite let go of. She came to this place not to heal others but to try to heal herself. A rented strip of land, 3 tired horses, and a cabin roof patched with more sky than shingle. The townsfolk watched her unload in silence. 2 women at the mercantile whispered, covering their mouths with flour-dusted hands. A boy pointed at the black bag she carried, still filled with bandages and tinctures, as if it were a pistol. No one offered help. No one spoke her name. But across the street, leaning against the hitching post of the saloon, a man did not look away. Broad-shouldered, hat tipped low, arms folded as if to keep his own grief inside. His beard carried the dust of weeks on the range, and a faint scar crossed from temple to jaw, half hidden beneath stubble. Folks called him Cole Brennan, ex-soldier, widowed rancher, too quick with his fists after whiskey, too silent in church. He watched Clara with a stare not cruel, but heavy, like a man who recognized ruin when he saw it and wondered if it matched his own. Clara lifted her trunk by herself, dragging it step by step toward the cabin. No hand came forward to ease the burden. The sun lowered, red as a wound, casting long shadows that made the town look even meaner than its silence. She felt the weight of every whisper, every eye that turned away, every memory of the battlefield tents where she had once been useful, even cherished. When she reached the crooked porch, she rested, chest heaving, throat raw with dust. Her fingers brushed the chain around her neck, the only thing she had left of her late husband, a bent wedding ring, tarnished, once gold. She wore it not as love anymore but as a brand, proof that she had been claimed and abandoned by fate all the same. A symbol of shame as much as of loss. Behind her, hooves clopped. She turned. Cole Brennan's horse, a roan with one white sock, stood still as stone. The cowboy dismounted slow, boots crunching gravel, eyes never leaving hers. For a heartbeat, Clara thought he might speak, might offer help. Instead, he just touched his hat brim, something between respect and warning, then turned and led his horse toward the darkening range. She realized then, whatever survival she carved here would be hers to earn, and yet, that man's shadow had just stepped into her story whether she wanted it or not. The prairie wind lifted the edge of her torn dress and carried the smell of sage. Alone, but not unseen. The prairie is never gentle to those who arrive untested. That first night, Clara learned how quickly silence could turn into menace. The wind came down from the ridges like a pack of wolves, rattling the cabin door and whistling through the unchinked logs. Her lantern guttered, throwing shadows that made the walls look full of holes, like a body riddled with bullets. She had never been afraid of darkness before, not in hospital tents, not with soldiers screaming their last breath beside her. But here, with no other breath but her own, the dark pressed different. It whispered, "You don't belong." The horses she had borrowed on debt kicked at the fence posts, frightened. One post split and leaned under the strain. She rushed outside in a shawl, clutching a rope, boots sinking into the mud from yesterday's storm. The moon slid behind ragged clouds, leaving only outlines, her breath, the sagging fence, the trembling flank of the chestnut mare. She tied the rope fast, her hand shaking more from cold than fear. But the mare jerked again, snapping the knot, eyes wide with panic. Clara stumbled, rope burning her palms, and fell hard into the dirt. And then, another sound. A low voice. Calm, steady. "Easy now, girl. Easy." The mare stilled, as if the voice itself was stronger than the storm. Clara pushed herself up on her elbows. Through the dim, she saw him, Cole Brennan. He held the mare's halter with sure hands, whispering to her like an old friend. His hat brim dripped rain, his shoulders dark with it. Clara felt her throat close, though not from the cold. She hadn't asked for him. She hadn't wanted anyone to see her fall. But there he was, as though the prairie itself had sent him. "You'll need stronger posts," he said, not unkind, but blunt. His voice was gravel, like a wagon wheel on stone. "I'll manage," she answered, brushing dirt from her dress, trying to sound whole. He tied the mare back with a knot swift and clean, then looked at her with eyes that seemed to weigh both her pride and her exhaustion. "A woman alone out here ought not be patching fences in the dark." "I'm not ought not. I'm here." Her voice cracked, but the words held. He said nothing more. Just tipped his hat again, the same half-respect, half-distance he'd given her in town, then turned to leave. But before he reached the saddle, Clara called after him, not because she wanted to, but because she had to. "Why'd you come?" He paused, hand on the reins, shoulders stiff as a man unused to explaining himself. Finally, without looking back, "'Cause I heard the horse screaming. And I know what it is to scream in the dark with nobody coming." The words hung there, heavier than the storm. Then he mounted and rode off, his silhouette swallowed by the rain. Clara stood alone again, rope burning her palms, but something else burned deeper, not shame this time, but the first faint spark of recognition. For the first time since she had stepped off the stagecoach, she did not feel entirely unseen. The morning came sharp with frost, the kind that bites the lungs before a fire can be coaxed alive. Clara wrapped herself in her husband's old coat, too wide in the shoulders, smelling faintly of tobacco long gone, and set about the work. The ranch was a patchwork of broken things, a leaning corral, a sagging barn roof, a well whose rope had frayed to a thread. Every task cut her hands, soaked her skirts, or left her coughing dust. Yet she worked, because work was the only way to keep silence from breaking her apart. By mid-morning she tried to draw water from the well. The bucket slipped from her blistered palms, rope snapping like a shot. She cursed under her breath, a sound too bitter for her own ears. She sat on the stone rim, throat tight. That's when she heard hooves. Again. Cole Brennan dismounted without a word, carrying a coil of new rope. He didn't ask, just tied it deftly, lowered the bucket, and hauled water with one easy pull, his arms marked with old scars that told of harder labor than this. "You watch too much sky," he muttered, handing her the rope. "Sky won't mend a thing." Clara met his eyes. "And you watch too much earth. Earth won't give you back the dead." His jaw worked. She thought he'd snap, maybe walk away for good. But instead he nodded once, like a soldier accepting a wound, and left the bucket full by her side. That afternoon, whispers followed her into town when she went for nails and flour. "She's playing nurse again, only now she's fixin' fence posts instead of men. Bet she poisoned that soldier, the one they said she lost. Cole Brennan's been seen at her place. Figures. Broken things attract." She kept her chin level, though each word cut like barbed wire. But when she turned at the counter to pay, she caught sight of something she hadn't expected. Cole himself, standing in line for feed, head lowered. He had heard. The mercantile fell silent, waiting for his cue. He could have walked past her, could have left her to carry the weight alone. Instead, without looking up, he said, "Load her nails with mine. I'll haul them out after sundown." The room shifted. Some faces frowned, others softened, but the silence was no longer sharp. Clara felt her throat ache, not with shame this time, but with the strange, dangerous comfort of being defended. That night, alone by her lantern, she laid the nails on the table. Each one shone like a promise she hadn't asked for, but couldn't quite let go of. And outside, on the edge of the prairie dark, she thought she heard a horse linger a moment too long before riding home. The days turned brittle as autumn pressed down, the fields gone yellow with dry grass. Clara had settled into a rhythm of mending fences by day, boiling beans by night, and ignoring the way the town's silence weighed heavier than its words. She thought, perhaps, she could endure. But prairie peace is always thin as paper. One spark is enough to tear it. She was splitting kindling when the mare screamed, a high, frantic cry. Clara ran outside and smelled it before she saw it, smoke. Thin, black threads climbing the horizon to the south. The wind carried it fast, carrying embers into the dry pasture that wrapped her cabin. She grabbed the water pail and ran, skirts clutched, heart hammering. She threw water on the first lick of flame near the corral post, but more sprang up, faster than she could chase. Her lungs filled with smoke, her eyes burned. She coughed, stumbled, swung the bucket again. The fire only hissed back. The horses reared, kicking at the fence. Clara shouted, tried to open the gate, but the rope jammed tight. She clawed at it with blistered hands. And then, thunder. Hooves pounding. Cole Brannan rode in like a storm of his own. He slid from the saddle and ran to her side, grabbing the rope with raw strength and tearing it free. The gate swung wide, horses bursting into the open, safe from the growing blaze. "Get back," he barked, dragging her away as another patch of grass caught. He hauled a wet blanket from his thul bag, slamming it down over the flames. Smoke billowed, stung their throats, but the fire slowed under his weight. Clara joined him, beating down the edges with a shawl, coughing until her ribs ached. Together they smothered one patch, then another, until the air cleared and the prairie calmed. When it was over, Clara dropped to her knees, hands raw, chest heaving. Cole crouched beside her, sweat streaking his soot-darkened face. For a long moment, neither spoke, only the sound of their breath, mingling in the smoky twilight. Then she felt it, his hand, rough and hesitant, brushing her wrist. Not binding, not claiming, just there. Steady. She hadn't realized how much she was shaking until that touch stilled her. "Who'd set a fire this close?" she rasped. Cole's eyes narrowed toward the ridge. Not the wind. Somebody with a match. The thought settled between them heavier than smoke. This wasn't accident. It was warning. Clara swallowed hard, tasting ash. She looked at him then, not as the town's widowed rancher, not as the man who carried his grief like a scar, but as the one who had run into her fire without hesitation. And though no words passed, something shifted. She was no longer alone against the blaze. That night, when she finally slept on the cot inside her patched-roof cabin, she dreamed of a hand that reached through smoke to steady hers, and woke with the faintest trace of warmth still lingering on her skin. By morning, the smoke was only a memory in the grass, black scars curling through yellow fields like writing no one wanted to read. Clara hitched her shawl tight around her shoulders and rode into town, her blistered hands hidden in her sleeves. She carried no proof but the stench of fire still woven into her hair. The mercantile's bell clanged as she stepped in. Heads turned. The same women who had whispered before stood frozen by the flour sacks, eyes sharp with something between curiosity and disdain. Clara set her jaw. "Someone set a blaze on my pasture last night. If it weren't for the horses, I'd have lost the cabin." Her voice was hoarse, but steady. Silence answered first. Then the blacksmith's wife said, almost sweetly, "Maybe it's the land saying you don't belong." A ripple of laughter followed, quick and cruel. Clara's throat burned hotter than the fire had. She wanted to shout, to demand which man in this town hated her enough to try and burn her alive. But the words tangled in her chest. The shop door swung open. Boots thudded. Cole Brannan stepped in, a shadow against the sun. His eyes swept the room once, then settled on Clara. Without asking, he crossed to the counter and placed a hand, broad, scarred, unshaking, on the small of her back. "She ain't lying," he said. His voice carried like a hammer against iron. "I saw the fire. Helped her fight it." The room shifted. Men looked down at their boots. Women blinked, lips pressed tight. For the first time, someone had spoken her truth aloud, and it had come from the very man they feared for his temper and silence. Clara trembled under his hand, not from fear, but from the strange weight of being believed. "Somebody out there lit it," Cole went on. "If you've got men with matches to spare, best rein 'em in before the prairie takes us all." The blacksmith's wife opened her mouth, then closed it. No laughter followed this time. Clara paid for her flour with shaking fingers. When she turned, Cole was still there, hat low, hands steady on her back until they stepped into the street. Outside, she spun on him, anger mixing with gratitude. "Why'd you do that? You didn't owe me." He met her eyes, gray and unreadable. "Don't reckon anyone should stand in a room full of silence alone." The words dug deeper than the fire's smoke ever had. She rode back to her ranch with the flour, the shame ring still cold against her chest, and the echo of his hand lingering at her back. For the first time, the town had seen them not as two ruins, but standing side by side. And once such a picture is seen, it cannot be unseen. The fire had left more than black scars in the grass. It had left Clara's hands raw, palms striped with blisters where rope and heat had bitten deep. She tried to hide them, wrapping rags tight, but even simple chores made her wince. By the third day, she could no longer hold the bucket steady. It slipped, splashing water across the dirt floor of the cabin. She sank onto the chair, shoulders shaking. Not from tears, those she refused to give, but from the stubborn ache of being undone by her own body. A knock startled her. Short, firm. She opened the door to find Cole Brannan standing there with a sack slung over one arm. He didn't ask to be let in. Just brushed past her, set the sack on the table, and pulled out a loaf of bread still warm, steam curling in the chill air. Baker owed me. Figured you'd use it. Clara stared. I don't need your pity. His eyes flicked to her bandaged hands. He said nothing, only pulled a chair out and set the bread down as if it belonged there. Then, from his pocket, he drew a small tin of salve. Ain't pity. It's lard and pine pitch. Works better than rag and grit. She froze. Her first instinct was to refuse, to send him out into the dusk where he belonged. But the ache in her palms throbbed too loud. Finally, with a tight jaw, she Saturday. Cole knelt by her chair, his broad frame awkward in the small cabin. He unwrapped the dirty cloths with careful fingers. The air stung when he touched her skin, but his hands were steady, as though the scars on his own had taught him gentleness. He spread the salve slow, the scent of pine rising between them. Clara watched his face, not handsome in the way of polished men, but weathered, strong, marked by life that had carved its lines without asking. His scar caught the lantern light, a pale stroke across shadow. For once, he did not hide it beneath his beard. You fight like someone who ain't afraid to burn, he muttered, winding fresh cloth around her palms. And you mend like someone who's lost more than he'll admit. Her voice was soft, surprising even herself. For a long moment, neither moved. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was full, of breath, of closeness, of something not yet spoken but alive. He tied the last knot, then rose to his feet too quickly, as if standing might break the spell. Keep it clean, he said gruffly. Change it daily. Clara touched the bandage, felt the warmth still lingering from his hands. She wanted to speak, to hold him there a moment longer. But the words caught, delicate and dangerous. So instead, she broke the bread and offered him half. Eat. He hesitated, then took it. And for the first time since she had stepped into this town of silence, Clara shared a meal not in loneliness but in quiet company. It was no declaration, no promise, just bread and bandages, but sometimes love begins in nothing more than that. Autumn bled into winter. The wind grew sharper, cutting through cracks in the cabin, but Clara found herself no longer chilled the same way. Each evening, when Cole rode by to drop feed or check the fence line, she felt the frost lift a little. It was never more than a few words, a loaf, a coil of rope left leaning against a porch, but each act was a stone laid in something sturdier than survival. But the town noticed. And Dry Creek did not like what it noticed. It began with mutters in the mercantile. Then louder talk outside the saloon. By the time Clara returned one Saturday to fetch flour, the whispers had sharpened into knives. She was a nurse, all right, but men died under her hand. Look at her, stealing bread from Brannan like a strumpet. Widow or not, she don't carry shame where she ought. She held her chin high, but the words sank deep. She paid for her sack, turned to leave, and found herself blocked at the door. 3 men stood there, shoulders wide, eyes narrow. Ranch hands, half drunk already. Evening, nurse, one drawled, mock sweet. Here you been mendin' Brannan's wounds, too. Laughter spat against her face. Clara's stomach nodded. She gripped the flour tighter, saying nothing. But the man reached, tugged at the chain around her neck. The bent wedding ring glinted in the dim light. Cayenne another man's mark still, eh? Wonder what Brannan thinks of being second. The ring had always been shame and loss, but in that moment, their hands on it turned it into a gallows. Before Clara could wrench away, a shadow filled the doorway. Cole. He didn't shout, didn't draw. He just stepped forward until the air itself seemed to bend. Take your hand off her. The ranch hand laughed, though his grip slackened. What's it to you, Brannan? You lay claim to a poisoned widow now. Cole's jaw tightened. He reached up slow, steady, and closed his hand around the man's wrist. One twist, not cruel but unyielding, and the ranch hand hissed, jerking free. She's under my protection, Cole said. His voice was iron. You got words, you spit 'em at me, not her. Silence fell. Even the drunkest man understood those words meant more than fists. They meant declaration. Clara's breath trembled. Heat rose in her throat, not from fear, but from the shocking weight of being defended, claimed, not as property, but as worth. The men backed off, muttering. The mercantile held its breath. And then, from the corner, a child's voice piped up. "She helped my ma when she birthed me." All eyes turned. A boy of 8 stood clutching his mother's skirt, eyes fierce. The mother flushed, tried to hush him, but the words had already cracked the silence. Not everyone turned softer, but some did. Enough. Cole guided Clara out into the street, his hand steady at her back like before. She wanted to speak, to thank him, to protest, to say she hadn't asked. But the words tangled. All she could do was hold the sack of flour tighter and feel the bent ring in her throat like it had changed weight. It was no longer a noose. Not with him beside her. That night the wind roared across the plains, rattling the shutters as if the whole world wanted in. Clara sat hunched near the hearth, the bent ring heavy at her throat, the flour sack resting by the door. She tried to steady her breath, but the mercantile scene replayed in her head. The laughter, the boy's sudden courage, Cole's words, "She's under my protection." A knock came, low and firm. She opened the door to find Cole there, shoulders shadowed in the lantern glow, his hat in his hands for once. He looked like a man who had been riding circles in his own thoughts until the night drove him here. "Just wanted to be sure you got home unbothered," he muttered. "I did," Clara said. But her voice caught, softer than she meant. "Because of you." He nodded, uneasy, and made to leave. But her hand, almost without her permission, brushed his arm. The contact froze them both. "Come in," she said. 2 words, simple as bread. Inside, the fire cast their shadows long against the log walls. Cole stood awkwardly near the door until Clara motioned him closer. She poured him coffee, though her hands trembled so much she spilled a drop on the table. He noticed, but said nothing. Instead, he sipped slow, as if giving her silence enough to breathe. Finally, she spoke. "They're not wrong, you know. Men did die under my care. One in particular, a boy, no older than that child today. I did everything I knew, but the fever took him. The regiment blamed me, and the whisper stuck. Every town since has carried it like scripture." Her throat tightened. "That's what I carry. That's why they see me the way they do." Cole set the cup down, eyes steady. "You think I ain't carried blame? I buried my wife 'cause I wasn't quick enough when the fever took her. Bury a woman you love once, and the town will call you cursed twice over. I ain't a stranger to whispers." For the first time, Clara dared to meet his gaze full. It was like staring into the heart of a scar, jagged, but real, alive. "I don't want protection," she whispered. "I want someone who sees me, not what they say." His hand, rough and scarred, lay on the table. Slowly, painfully slow, she set hers atop it. He didn't pull away. His thumb brushed a knuckle, a trembling gesture of someone who hadn't touched tenderness in years. The fire popped. Shadows swayed. Their faces were close, closer than words could bridge. His breath warmed her cheek, lips hovering just shy of hers, but he stopped there, jaw tight, as if love was a line he feared to cross too soon. Clara closed her eyes. Not disappointment, not hunger, just the fragile relief of knowing a kiss wasn't needed to feel the truth. They sat that way, hand in hand, fire painting their scars gold. It was not passion's blaze. Not yet. It was the first ember of devotion, the kind that waits, that works, that does not leave. The prairie has a way of remembering sins. 4 weeks after that night by the fire, Clara and Cole worked side by side, though still in silence more than speech. He mended her corral with his own hands. She patched his torn sleeve with clumsy stitches. Their closeness grew not in declarations, but in the slow rhythm of 2 lives learning to beat together. But peace never lasts where hatred still smolders. It came just past midnight. The horses screamed first, hooves drumming the earth. Clara woke with her heart already hammering. She smelled it then, smoke again, acrid and thick, clawing through the cracks in the cabin. She stumbled to the door. Flames licked at the barn roof this time, higher and fiercer than before. And in the glow she saw him, a man on horseback at the ridge, torch still burning in his hand before he turned to flee. Her blood ran cold. Cole was already there, galloping hard from his own ranch. He slid off his roan and was at her side before she could even cry his name. "They're trying to drive you out," he said, teeth clenched against the smoke. "Not by whispers this time." Together they fought. He hauled water, she beat at the flames with wet cloth, both coughing, choking, stumbling through sparks. But the fire was hungry, clawing at every beam. At one point, the roof groaned, ready to fall. Clara cried out, "Cole, leave it. We'll die if we stay." But he grabbed her shoulders, eyes fierce even through the soot. "You run, they win. You stay, we stand." Her knees buckled under the choice, fear to run, terror to stay. And then, through the smoke, she heard another sound, a neigh. Her mare had refused to bolt, circling the corral as if unwilling to leave her. The horse's stubborn defiance struck Clara like a bell. If even a beast would not abandon her, how could she abandon herself? Together, she and Cole heaved one last bucket, doused the beam before it collapsed. They staggered back as the fire hissed and died to black smoke. Silence fell, broken only by their ragged breaths. The barn still stood, charred but unbroken. Clara fell to her knees, the bent wedding ring cold against her chest. With trembling hands, she pulled it from the chain and pressed it into the wet earth. A symbol once of shame, now buried like the past that had haunted her. Cole knelt beside her, his scarred hand closing over hers in the dirt. "You're not leaving," he said, voice raw. Not a question. A vow. And for the first time, Clara believed it. By dawn, the sky was pale with ash and dawn fire. Smoke still curled from the barn roof, black against the morning. Clara stood outside, her palms raw, her hair damp with sweat and soot. Cole lingered close, one hand resting on her shoulder as steady as the earth itself. Word had spread fast. By sunrise, the townsfolk gathered at the edge of her land, drawn by smoke and rumor alike. They stared at the charred barn, at Clara's burned skirts, at Cole standing beside her. Whispers began again. Second fire. She won't last. Brannon'll ruin himself with her. Clara's throat tightened. For a moment she almost shrank again beneath their gaze. But then she remembered the mare's defiance, the child's voice in the mercantile, Cole's scarred hand over hers as she buried the ring. Slowly, she straightened. Her voice shook but carried. "This land is mine now. You tried to burn me out. You failed." A hush spread. It wasn't triumph, just fact. But it was enough. Cole stepped forward then. Without hesitation, he took her bandaged hand in his. He didn't speak, didn't challenge, only let the sight of them together answer what no words could. His scar against her scars. His strength steadying her trembling. The crowd shifted. Some turned away. But a few, the boy who had spoken for her, his mother, the blacksmith, nodded. A small crack, a change. Not the whole town, but enough to begin. As the people drifted back toward town, Clara felt her knees weaken. Cole guided her inside, lowering her into the chair by the hearth. He lit a fresh fire, its glow spreading warmth into the dim cabin. Clara watched him, this man who had walked through smoke twice for her, who had spoken when she could not, who had given her silence that held her rather than crushed her. Her hand lifted, trembling, and brushed the scar along his jaw. He stilled, breath-catching. For a heartbeat, the whole world seemed to pause with him. Then he leaned forward, lips grazing her palm, a kiss not of hunger, but of reverence. Tears blurred her vision. She whispered, "I thought the ring was all I had left." Cole met her eyes, his voice low, unshaken. "You've got more than a ring now." Outside, the prairie wind carried the last threads of smoke away. Inside, the firelight burned steady, no longer a blaze of destruction, but of survival. And in that cabin, scarred, patched, stubborn against the prairie, two broken lives had chosen not just to endure, but to endure together. Old cowhands would tell the story years later, sitting under wide desert skies. They'd speak of the nurse-turned-rancher, the widowed cowboy, the fire that tried to take them, and the ring buried in the earth. And always, the story ended with the same question whispered into the flames. What keeps a heart alive in the desert? A kiss, a scar, or the memory of one hand that never let go?